Melisandre stood at the very edge of King's Landing as dusk bled into evening, crimson light lingering on the horizon like embers in a dying fire. The soot-stained sky arced above her in a palette of bruised purples and smoky reds. A faint wind rustled the hem of her scarlet robes. That breeze carried the salt of the Blackwater Bay, the grim stench of rotting seaweed intermingling with the city's perpetual odor of sweat and smoke. She paused, her eyes half-lidded, as she let the wind press gently against her cheeks. A fleeting tremor danced along her fingers, but she bowed her head, whispering to Azor, the Lord of Light. In her mind's eye, she saw the faint glimmer of a vision yet to be fully revealed. A portent perhaps, or merely an echo of her hopes. She had come to the great city not as a supplicant, but as a prophet. Her mission was holy. She told herself this over and over. She was a vessel meant to deliver the world from the darkness that threatened it. She had once believed Stannis Baratheon would be the savior, the chosen champion of the Red God, Azor Ahai reborn. That dream had perished, doused by winter snows and the defeat on the fields where shadows had not risen to fight for him. Yet the prophecy still lived, she was certain. Azor Ahai must come. The long night had tested the living once, and though the dead had been pushed back, the shadows had not vanished. Power stirred in the corners of the world, in places where only a faint glow of moonlight reached. She could sense it, in the flickering flames and in the hush of her own heart. The story was not over. And so her faith guided her to King's Landing. Every inch of the city felt different from how she remembered it in the days before the Great War. She recalled the building tension under Joffrey's reign, the stench of fear and cruelty, the cold haughtiness of the Lannisters. The air had changed, grown heavier with the weight of new tragedies and new triumphs. Houses had burned. People had died. The city had endured terror from dragons and from men alike. Now it seemed battered, uncertain, with half-built structures and towers that stood precariously. But it still remained a seat of power, a hub where destiny converged. The Red Keep rose against the bruised sky, its outline jagged and foreboding. The castle loomed on the cliff over the bay, a silent sentinel. Somewhere within its halls, more secrets and shadows would twist together, tangling with her own unwavering purpose. Slipping through the gates under the watchful gaze of guards, she found it surprisingly easy to pass. Her red robes attracted curiosity, some suspicion, but few recognized her with immediate certainty. Some who had heard rumors of a red woman years ago squinted at her, uncertain if this was, indeed, the same Shadowbinder from Ahai. She had no illusions that anonymity would last long. In a place like King's Landing, whispers traveled swiftly. She moved with measured poise through the winding streets, stepping over broken cobblestones, brushing past urchins with hollow eyes and beggars who stretched out battered hands. She offered them no coin, only a faint, wordless prayer of protection under her breath. The night was growing deeper. Torches sputtered in iron brackets, pools of half-hearted light dancing across the alleyways. Melisandre let the labyrinthine roads guide her toward Flea Bottom, the underbelly of the city where crime flourished and despair clung to the corners. She had no fear. The Lord of Light was her shield, his fire her weapon. Let petty thieves lurk in the darkness if they wished. She had dealt with greater perils than knives and clubs. She kept her senses alert, fully aware that unknown eyes could be tracking her. In a small courtyard flanked by collapsing hovels, she paused. An upturned cart lay on its side, its wheel crooked like a dead spider's legs. Flames flickered in her mind, calling her to stop. The air hummed with possibility, as if something in the darkness beckoned. She stretched out her hand. Her ruby glinted on her neck, capturing the glow of a distant lantern. She did not speak. The hush of the night around her was still, broken only by the distant hoot of some night bird. She knew these stilled moments intimately. They were the preludes to a vision. She sank to her knees on the ragged dirt, letting her robes pool around her. Carefully, she peeled away a portion of the garment to reveal a small wooden bowl, carefully tucked inside, that she carried for the reading of flames. She set the bowl on the ground, poured a small measure of oil into it, and lit it with a flint. The flames rose immediately, spitting sparks into the night. She bent her head over it, her red hair sweeping forward. In the dancing reflection on her eyes, one could see a wave of images pass like fleeting ghosts. The flames told her many things, but always cryptically. She parted her lips. Her breath caught, and she whispered a single phrase. Azor, Ahai. The words hung in the air like a charm. An image blossomed in the flames. The red keep, wreathed in a swirl of smoke and cinder. Shadowed figures moved in the courtyard. A sense of anguish and exultation flickered. Then something glowed, bright as a newborn sun. She inhaled sharply, the swirling scene illuminating her features, and she felt heat coil around her. Her fingertips tingled, as if the fire inside the bowl surged for a moment, longing to consume more than just the oil. Then it died, leaving the courtyard in abrupt darkness. The hush returned. Only the faint clang of a distant watchman's footsteps disturbed the silence. She stayed kneeling for a moment, letting the pounding of her heart subside. She knew what she must do. The red keep was key, but her task would not be simple. To summon Azor Ahai, true and unmistakable, to carve him from the flames of destiny. This required a sacrifice greater than any she had yet performed. She closed her eyes and felt a pang of sorrow for what would be lost, but unwavering resolution quickly drowned out that trace of regret. When she stood, a sudden chill breeze cut through the courtyard. She collected her bowl, stowed it among her robes, and moved on. Past midnight, the city's labyrinth welcomed her with quiet, sporadic lights. More guards prowled the main thoroughfares, so she took narrower paths. Occasionally, a voice hissed from a shadow, offering illusions of safety or pleasures that came with a price. She did not pause. She was not here for those earthly indulgences. Her entire being was focused on that single flickering vision in her mind. She found a modest inn near the Street of Seeds, one that looked neither too prosperous nor too squalid. The sign above the door, which squeaked on its rusted hinges, displayed a faded emblem of a green vine. She stepped inside to the smell of old ale, straw, and dust. A yawning innkeeper looked up. His eyes flashed with alarm at the sight of her red robes, but she smiled softly, placed a few coins in his hand, and asked for a room. He did not ask questions, and she did not offer her name. Under her breath, she murmured words of comfort to keep the man from prying. Aurora's warmth seemed to radiate from her presence, and the innkeeper soon returned to his mild state of half-consciousness. In the solitude of her hired chamber, she knelt once again, lighting a single candle. The room was tiny, with a single straw bed, a wooden chest missing half its hinges, and a small window that overlooked an alley strewn with refuse. Yet to Melisandre, it felt large enough, close enough to her god. She stared at the candle flame, willing the spark to show her more. Nothing came, not even a murmur of possibility. She let out a careful breath. The day had been long, and the night's mysteries were only beginning. She would need her strength. She extinguished the candle, letting the darkness wrap her in a cloak of shadows. Sleep claimed her, bringing dreams of swirling fire and a distant, resonant heartbeat that seemed to reverberate through her bones. Morning arrived with a muted glow piercing through the grimy window. She awoke and remembered precisely why she was here. She had no illusions that King's Landing's new regime, whatever shape it took after the wars, would greet her plan with approval. But the prophecy demanded it, and so she was resolute. She smoothed her robes, murmured her morning prayer, and left the inn with barely a nod to the dozing innkeeper. Outside, the city bustled. Merchants yelled about their wares, hawking everything from half-rotten vegetables to questionable cuts of meat. Soot-stained children darted through the crowds, while the occasional retainer marched past, forging a path for some lesser noble or merchant of coin. Melisandre moved among them, distinct as a crimson sail on a gray sea. She made her way up the main road, where the rubble of old conflicts had been shoved aside or hastily rebuilt. Once, the great Septa Baylor had stood proud in the center of the city. Now, she saw only remains and replacement structures. Faith in the Seven had never been hers, but she knew the power that grand buildings could hold over the hearts of the masses. The destruction told her that King's Landing had endured transformations. People had grown weary of zealotry that offered no salvation. She could sense a hunger for hope that at times manifested as cynicism. Hope was scarce, so people replaced it with cynicism or bitterness. That, she thought, might be to her advantage. When darkness encroaches, the light can appear all the brighter. Several times she paused at corners or near fountains, listening. People spoke of the city's affairs with hushed or exasperated voices. Those who had once expected a golden age found themselves instead in a city struggling to find its identity. King's Landing teetered on the brink of another transformation. No one could say what shape it would take. Rumors abounded of lords quarreling over influence, of unscrupulous merchants buying favor, and of once-forgotten powers sending envoys to vie for control. The Red Keep remained the seat of authority, but authority itself was a flickering flame in a drafty hall. Melisandre made her way to a vantage point from which she could study the castle. Standing on a modest hill overlooking the winding approach, she gazed up at the red stone towers. The keep's walls bore the scars of dragonfire and siege. Wind rustled her hair, carrying the faint clang of a distant smithy. She stood statue-still for a time, letting her mind wander over the possibilities. Burning it all, that was the price. A sacrifice so immense that it would echo through the ages. She recalled the words she had read in ancient texts. Words from Ahai that had etched themselves into her memory. The summoning of light is the forging of a blade in living hearts. The forging of a blade in living hearts. She knew the meaning all too well. Life and death entangled, consumed by flame to bring forth a champion. But to burn the Red Keep, she could practically taste the fear that would reverberate from the populace. There would be panic, bloodshed, screams. Would it be worth it if, in the conflagration's aftermath, Azor Ahai stood reborn, shining like a brand new sun against the gloom? She believed so. Still, the path was steep. She could not simply stride in and set the castle ablaze. She needed to consider her approach carefully. The city was not lawless. Walls and gates were guarded. If an attempt at mass destruction seemed imminent, the entire garrison would mobilize to stop her. Even her shadow tricks, her illusions, would not suffice against thousands of swords if she acted rashly. She withdrew for now, seeking a place to plan. In a cramped wine sink near the city's southwestern wall, she took a seat at a corner table. The stale smell of spilt ale mingled with the sharper tang of cheap wine. A few patrons cast her suspicious glances, but she simply folded her hands and closed her eyes as though in a brief prayer. The innkeeper approached, asking if she would order. She requested plain water, ignoring his muttered complaint about how water was dearer than low-grade wine. She took the clay cup he brought, sipped it, and stared at the table's warm grain, letting her thoughts circle the problem. She must test the city's readiness for chaos. Where were the vulnerabilities? Which sections of the Red Keep were less patrolled? How much knowledge did she have from her previous visits? In her mind, she recalled those halls of stone, the many corridors and hidden passages that snaked under the castle's foundation. The Targaryen kings had built labyrinths beneath the fortress, and later monarchs had added to them. She had navigated a few in her time, but never fully. If she was to set a sacrificial blaze, it might be more easily ignited from below, letting the fire climb the keep from within. Doing so might lead to partial collapse, or it might fail to spread as thoroughly as she needed. She could not rely on mere architecture to channel the flames to every crevice. Her lore demanded a grand, complete offering. She picked at a spot on the table, feeling splinters catch at her fingertips. A dim hush fell over the wine sink. Someone had recognized her, or at least recognized her robes, and a certain tension emanated from the other customers. The Red Woman had a reputation, and rumor said she could conjure illusions, kill with shadows, or twist men's minds to her will. Her hair seemed more vibrant than any ordinary shade of red, and her eyes glowed with an unearthly light. The patrons shifted uneasily, but no one dared confront her. After what felt like hours to them, though only a fraction of an hour had passed, she rose, leaving a single coin on the table. Nobody tried to stop her as she drifted out into the afternoon sun. She wandered the city, absorbing its rhythms. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the hawker's calls in the market, the hiss of curses when someone's foot trod on a rival's patch of curb. In a narrow side street, two dogs fought over scraps. A woman in patched clothes cradled a small child, humming a lullaby that was all sorrow and distant yearning. A group of street performers juggled tin cups, trying to distract passers-by long enough for a partner to pick their pockets. Everywhere, life teemed with a fractious energy that both repelled and enthralled her. She saw in these people the raw material of sacrifice, souls that Aralor might claim in a wave of flame. It was not cruelty that made her think so, but purpose. The darkness was real, the threats to the living were manifold, and the prophecy demanded a champion. All had roles to play. Eventually she found herself at the foot of the winding road that led straight to the Red Keep's gate. The fortress perched at the top, a reminder of dominion. Guards stood vigilant at the portcullis. She let her eyes trace the line of the walls, counting arrow slits, noting vantage points. She observed how the midday light fell upon the structure, how wind currents brushed against the parapets. Subtle details. She noted the watchers, archers, foot soldiers, perhaps a knight or two strolling the battlements. Then her gaze drifted upward to the tower that served as the heart of the keep. She pictured it bathed in flames. The image sent a shiver through her. Whether it was fear or anticipation, she did not entirely know. She heard a soft murmur behind her. A guard had approached. He was short and wiry, with cautious eyes peering from beneath his helm. "You've been standing here a while," he said. "Might I ask what your business is?" She faced him calmly. "I'm admiring the Red Keep," she answered, letting her voice lull him. It holds such history within its walls. He frowned. "You're that red woman," he said, more a statement than a question. "I am. Do not fear me. My only interest is in the city's welfare." She spoke each word slowly, pressing a bit of suggestion into her tone, willing him to be at ease. He shook his head, but she sensed his resolve weakening. She had a power that many did not comprehend. "The city's welfare, is it?" She gave a soft nod. "Yes. Sometimes to preserve life, one must do difficult things. But fear not. I intend no harm to you or to the innocent." Half-truths danced in her mouth like sparks. He shifted his weight, glancing nervously at the guard post. "Be about your business, then," he muttered, stepping back. But she saw the curiosity in his eyes. Perhaps the seeds of doubt had been planted too. She offered him a gentle, almost maternal smile, and drifted away, leaving him standing there with a troubled expression. As the day inched toward afternoon, she slipped into the labyrinthine alleys behind the Red Keep. Searching for the remnants of an old tunnel she recalled from her previous sojourn. Down a narrow lane, half obscured by crates and rubbish, she found it. A low archway of stone leading into darkness beneath a weathered portion of the city wall. She had come here once to slip into the keep unseen. Now, she only wanted to recall the structure's shape, to see if it might serve as a point of infiltration should she need direct access. The arch was sealed by an iron gate, secured with a sturdy padlock. She knelt, peering through the bars. The blackness inside was still and silent. She smelled mildew, stagnant water, and the faint odor of something rotting. No direct guard was stationed here, presumably because the lock was believed sufficient. Melisandre rested her hand against the iron bars, letting her fingertips trace the cold metal. She murmured a few words, testing the resonance of the place, feeling if it had any latent wards or illusions that might hinder her. She sensed only emptiness and old echoes. Perhaps a determined intruder with the right tools could break through. She filed the thought away for later. For her actual plan, she might require something more than a mere infiltration. But every piece of knowledge had value. She retreated back into the daylight and made her way down a side stair that led toward the mud gate. Time slipped past. She neither ate nor drank much. Sustenance of the spirit was more important to her than earthly nourishment. She spent the rest of the day moving about the city, subtly gathering news and tidbits of rumor. She heard that the new king, an heir appointed after the wars, was occupied with matters of trade and reconstruction. Whispers said he lacked the iron will of past monarchs. That might be a blessing for Melisandre's cause, for a strong-willed king could rally a harsh crackdown. Another rumor told of a faction in the court that was deeply suspicious of all foreign priests, red or otherwise. She made note of that, knowing her presence would not be ignored for long. She drifted toward the harbor at sunset, standing at the wharf's edge to watch the great sea stretch out like a mirror of molten gold. Fishing boats bobbed on the gentle waves. Gulls screamed overhead. She let the tang of brine fill her lungs. She tried to see beyond the horizon, to recall the lands of Essos she had once roamed, to recall the ancient city of Ahai and the teachings that had shaped her. All that had led her here, to this moment, to a decision that would upend the lives of thousands. She watched the sun dip lower, a burning orb that stained the sky crimson. She felt Orlor's presence, pressing gently at the corners of her consciousness, urging her onward. Twilight settled over King's Landing like a weary sigh. She returned to the same modest inn as the previous night, stepping around a dozing drunk near the door. Inside, a few rough-looking men eyed her with bleary suspicion. She paid them no mind, slipping up the stairs to her room. Once inside, she lit her candle again and placed it on the rickety chest. The flame wavered in the stale air. She removed her cloak and settled on her knees. Taking a small pouch from her sleeve, she sprinkled a handful of fine reddish powder into the candle flame. It sputtered, then flared, dancing high. She gazed into that flickering brilliance. She let her breath slow and her vision blur. The dancing sparks became shapes, swirling orbs of molten orange that bled into each other. Slowly, she began to see. The Red Keep again, ablaze. Billowing smoke rolled across the bay. People screamed, running in confusion. Then, through the roar of fire, a silhouette emerged. A man? Possibly, though the figure was wreathed in such light that it hurt her inner eye to watch. He held a sword, an unearthly blade glowing red-hot, forging itself in the air. She sensed heartbreak, sacrifice, a punishing choice that would carve away all illusions. Then the vision cracked, scattering into darkness, leaving her panting softly. She let out a gentle moan, the sound echoing off the narrow walls. Her entire body ached with longing, for that is what she felt whenever she glimpsed the harbinger of Azor Ahai. Longing for the prophecy to be fulfilled at last. Longing for the hope that such a champion might bring. She inhaled a steadying breath, allowing her heartbeat to settle. She whispered a prayer to the Lord of Light, thanking him for this guidance, flawed though it might be. She knew the price of these visions, the toll they took on her spirit. But the flame was her life, and the darkness would be her undoing if she did not follow its call. When she finally extinguished the candle, the room plunged into a blackness so total that she could not see her own hand. She listened to the noises of the inn, a cough in the hallway, the snore of a man behind the adjacent wall, the faint scuffle of rats in the rafters. King's Landing was not asleep, not entirely, but she felt like she stood at the cusp of a dream from which she could not wake. She felt how the city's fate, and perhaps the fate of the realm, balanced precariously. Tomorrow, she would take the first concrete steps toward shaping that fate. At dawn, she emerged from the inn and headed deeper into the city. She needed certain materials for the rituals she planned. Incense from Korth to sharpen her visions. Candles infused with special oils to attract the presence of Orlor more keenly. A dagger made of obsidian or dragon glass if she could find it, for such a blade had properties well suited for the dark arts. She knew of a small shop near Visenya's Hill, run by an old pentoshi who dealt in exotic goods. She arrived there, the shop sign a battered plank with foreign letters half effaced by time. Inside, the smell of stale spices and moth-eaten rugs overwhelmed her. The shopkeeper recognized her at once. His eyes widened, but greed overpowered any fear. He bowed and muttered half-fluently in common tongue that he was at her service. She listed her needs. He rummaged through shelves and chests, producing small vials, lumps of pungent substances, twisted lumps of black glass. She appraised them carefully, discarding half as worthless or of poor quality. Then they settled on a price. She paid a sum that would make a normal person weep, but she gave it freely, for gold mattered little compared to her mission. The shopkeeper packaged everything in a rough sack, his hands trembling. She thanked him, ignoring his repeated attempts to offer her further bargains. Leaving the shop, she continued through the bustling streets until she reached a deserted corner. She found a dilapidated stable behind a ruined house, out of sight of prying eyes. There, she unwrapped her purchases and inspected them again. The obsidian dagger glimmered in the faint sunlight. She held it to her cheek and closed her eyes, sensing the cold dragon glass. In some legends, such a blade could slay creatures of the long night. But in her hands, it might serve a different purpose. To cut open a portal of possibility, to carve away illusions. Satisfied, she rewrapped the items and secured them within the folds of her robe. Days passed in this manner, each one an exercise in stealth and preparation. By day, she observed the city, gleaning the rhythms of guard patrols, the shape of the Red Keep's defenses, the comings and goings of officials and servants. By night, she pored over her visions, using each new revelation to refine her plan. Sometimes, she glimpsed shapes in the flames that unsettled her. Spectral forms, eyes weeping blood, a swirl of ice creeping across a dark sky. She awoke in the small hours with her heart pounding. The world's great battle was not over, and she felt in her bones that a darkness was gathering beyond the edges of what men could see. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, she decided it was time to test the waters of the Red Keep itself. She needed to see those halls again, to sense the resonance of the place, to walk among its corridors. She waited until the changing of the guard, then draped herself in a plain cloak over her crimson robes. Hood drawn, she ascended the road toward the main gate. The guards glanced at her, but a whispered phrase in a soft accent eased their suspicion. She slipped inside, finding herself once more in the courtyard. Though she was here discreetly, she could not suppress the thrill that came with stepping across the threshold. The Red Keep felt alive, an ancient beast with a heartbeat of stone. Torches flickered in the entryways, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Servants bustled about, carrying linens, trays of food, buckets of water. A pair of knights in polished armor strode past, their boots echoing. She kept her gaze low, letting her hood obscure her face. Memories washed over her, the time she once stepped into these corridors in the days of Stannis' cause, the hush that followed her footsteps then, how she had believed destiny was just within her grasp. She moved with confidence, though in truth, her knowledge of the keep was partial. She turned down a side passage, heading toward the library she recalled. The door was shut, but not locked. Slipping inside, she found rows of shelves lined with manuscripts, scrolls, and old ledgers. Dust motes swirled in the torchlight. Her footsteps were soft on the stone floor. She scanned the titles, searching for references to prophecy or lore that might be hidden here. Many books had been lost to fires and pillaging during past upheavals, but perhaps something remained. She found a set of scrolls dedicated to the faith of the Seven, genealogies of noble houses, and a few volumes on the Targaryen reign. One battered tome caught her eye. The Fire That Burns, on the Powers of Azor. She felt a faint spark of surprise that such a text survived in the royal library. She slid it off the shelf, its binding cracked and flaking. Placing it on a nearby table, she carefully opened it. The pages were yellowed, and the script was cramped, but she recognized some references to the legends of Azor Ahai. Here and there, entire passages had been blacked out by censors, presumably from a time when the crown regarded foreign religions with suspicion. She traced a finger over the lines that remained. The prince that was promised shall stand against the darkness, and his blade shall be Lightbringer, forged amidst smoke and salt, tempered with the blood of the living. She lingered on those last words, tempered with the blood of the living. Always the prophecy demanded blood. She did not flinch. She had seen it before, had partaken in it before. This time, though, the scale was so much greater. The Red Keep was not some single life. It was an entire fortress full of men, women, and children. Such a sacrifice could shake the very foundations of the realm. If the result was Azor Ahai incarnate, then it was a divine necessity. She pressed her hand over the words, inhaled sharply, and then she felt more resolved than ever. Leaving the library, she wound her way through lesser-used hallways, trusting old memories to guide her. She came upon a small sept within the keep, a modest chamber for prayer to the Seven. It was empty at this hour. The statues loomed in candlelit alcoves, each representing one of the aspects of the seven. Their stone eyes regarded her solemnly. She smiled at them, a smile that held neither reverence nor mockery, but a certain pity. In her heart, she knew her own god was the true force. Then she heard footsteps. She darted behind a column, heart thudding. A septa entered, carrying a fresh candle. She placed it on the altar, murmuring a prayer. Melisandre waited, unmoving, until the septa left. Then she slipped away, her presence undetected. She eventually found an exit route through a side door, stepping out onto a narrow walkway overlooking the city. The moon hung above, a silver sickle, bathing the rooftops in a pale glow. She moved along the wall, passing beneath the watchful eyes of the guards on the battlements. No one challenged her. As she peered down at the city lights spread below, a hush fell over her thoughts. This was the realm she would throw into chaos. The flicker of torches, the faint glow of hearth fires, these were the lives of ordinary people. Families, children, old men, weary wives. A city brimming with stories. She stood on a precipice, about to cast them all into the maw of flame. She closed her eyes and repeated the words, "The night is dark and full of terrors." And soon, the darkest night would come unless she acted. Quietly, she made her way down a spiral staircase, her footsteps echoing softly. She passed an antechamber where two guards dozed in chairs, lulled by the quiet. Slipping through a small postern door, she found herself outside the walls, the night air biting at her cheeks. She felt a rush of relief. Her successful venture into the keep told her enough. The old passages were as she remembered. The guards somewhat lax in certain areas. The fearsome intimidation that once cloaked the castle had relaxed with the new monarchy. The time would soon be ripe. Over the next few nights, she prepared her ritual in secret. She found a hidden cellar in the city, an abandoned storehouse near the dragon pit, where few ventured after sundown. There, she laid out her ritual circle, scattering chalk and salts in specific patterns. She placed candles in a ring, each infused with the oils she had acquired. She burned the incense from Korath, letting the perfumed smoke coil through the darkness, thick and heady. She chanted under her breath, calling on our Lord to guide her hands, to bless the fire she would invoke. She felt the power stirring, thrumming in her blood. Yet the final step remained elusive. She knew the date, the hour perhaps, but not the final impetus. Each day, she noticed tensions rising in the city. A wave of suspicion enveloped her. People whispered that the Red Woman was back, that she had been seen wandering the streets, slipping into the keep. The small folk remembered old stories of her burning effigies, reading flames and conjuring shadows. Guards paid more attention to red-robed figures. She had to take extra care now, traveling in a plain cloak. She found multiple locks changed on the old passages she had scouted. The city was slowly awakening to the danger she posed, though they did not yet know what shape it would take. Still, she was determined. The time came for her to gather the last component she needed. The spark that would unleash the flames on a massive scale. Greek fire, wildfire, dragon fire. By any name, it was that volatile substance that had turned battles into carnage. She heard rumors that a secret store of wildfire remained in King's Landing, hidden in vaults that even the newest master of whispers might not fully know. She did not plan to rely wholly on that. She had her own sorcery, her own incantations to inflame normal fire into something unstoppable. But wildfire, or any residue of it, would magnify her success. She recalled the raw power unleashed in the Battle of the Blackwater. That green inferno had consumed ships and men alike, unstoppable once ignited. If she could harness a fraction of that, the Red Keep would become a pyre that no force could quell. Thus, she began asking quiet questions in the city's underbelly. To find a single barrel of that potent substance, or even a hidden cache. She did not speak directly, but used veiled inquiries, illusions of coin, and manipulations of memory to keep suspicion away. She found those who had once served as pyromancers or apprentices to them. Most claimed ignorance or had died in the wars. But one old man, hunched and half-blind, recalled that some wildfire caches had never been recovered. He told her of vaults beneath the city, places where the Alchemists Guild once stored their most dangerous concoctions. She offered him gold. His hand shook. He told her everything he could remember. Now, an image crystallized in her mind. She would ignite the keep from below, summoning the flames of Aralor. The resulting blaze would feed on the hidden pockets of wildfire, if they still existed. The entire fortress would burn. The illusions, wards, and enchantments she would weave would ensure it spread quickly, unstoppable as the wrath of a god. In the Inferno's heart, the prophecy would quicken, forging the champion the world needed. She lingered on that image with a breathless awe, her heart pounding. The date approached. She sensed it in the stars and in the hush of her nightly visions. She would not wait much longer. One last night, she returned to her hidden cellar and laid out her circle. She placed the obsidian dagger at the center, along with a small vial of her own blood. She pricked her fingertip, letting the drops of scarlet well up. Carefully, she anointed the blade, murmuring incantations. The candle's flames danced higher, forming twisting shapes that flickered like serpents in the gloom. Her voice rose, steady and measured, as she called to Aralor. The gloom outside the candlelight seemed to pulse in response. Then, in the midst of her invocation, the dagger flared with a heat that made her draw back. She felt the presence of the Red God. She felt his approval, his hunger for the sacrifice that would soon come. When the final word, her incantation, faded, the cellar went dark. Her breath came fast, and for a moment, her hands trembled. It was time. She had no illusions about how King's Landing would react. A full legion might mobilize. There might be attempts to save the keep. Innocents would try to flee, or they might be trapped within. The corridors would fill with screams, smoke, and terror. In the madness, she would hold fast to her cause, summoning the flame until the entire fortress was ablaze. Out of that conflagration, Azor Ahai would emerge, or the city would be reduced to rubble for nothing. She clung to her faith, certain that Aralor's prophecy would not fail. Hours before dawn on the appointed day, she stood at the city's edge, on a bluff overlooking the Blackwater Bay. The sky overhead was black, dotted with faint stars struggling to pierce the haze of city smoke. She gazed at the silhouette of the Red Keep in the distance. A hush enveloped her, as if the world itself held its breath. She felt the gravity of what she was about to do. Then she raised her arms, letting her cloak billow in the wind. Under her breath she intoned the name of Aralor, calling upon his presence to guide her steps. Tomorrow night, the largest blaze King's Landing had ever seen would erupt. And she, Melisandre of Ahai, would stand at its heart, orchestrating the ruin and the rebirth in one fell stroke. She let that thought fill her. She whispered a final prayer in the old tongue, ancient words that resonated in her chest like the tolling of a distant bell. Then she turned and descended back into the city, the first faint glow of dawn catching the corners of her red robes. Each step felt heavy with destiny. The time had come to summon Azor Ahai, to beckon the chosen champion from the flames. She would make King's Landing the altar of that summoning, and the Red keep its sacrificial pyre. Even as her spirit trembled with the enormity of it, her resolve was absolute. The night was dark and full of terrors, but the fire within her was unquenchable. Dawn's early light brought a hazy glow to King's Landing, turning the air above the city into a pale wash of lavender. Melisandre stood alone in a cramped courtyard near the dragon pit, letting the hush of daybreak settle over her. Even the usual clamor of the city seemed subdued in these minutes, as if the populace collectively held its breath. A few birds, roused by the first hints of morning, fluttered overhead. Their chirping sounded distant and forlorn. She shut her eyes, inhaling the scent of ash-laden air. The final stage of her plan was upon her, and every nerve in her body felt sharpened to a point, thrumming with a focus so intense it bordered on pain. She pictured the Red Keep in her mind. Those towering walls, the labyrinth within, the men and women who would still be sleeping, or just waking to start their duties. The quiet knowledge of what she meant to do enveloped her like a cloak. No outward sign betrayed her intention. She appeared as she often did, composed, an otherworldly glint in her eyes, her crimson robes gently rustling in the faint breeze. She felt her ruby necklace grow warm against her skin, as if Urlor's presence pressed closer, encouraging her to move. Yet she whispered a final prayer for clarity. Even in her unwavering faith, some corner of her heart recognized the magnitude of the horror she was about to unleash. But the prophecy was absolute. Only through the greatest sacrifice could Azor Ahai arise in full glory. She left the courtyard and walked through the waking streets, slipping among the stalls of early merchants who set up fruit and fish under ragged awnings. A few servants bustled by with baskets of bread or fresh vegetables, heading toward the keep or the wealthier quarters. She could hear street criers in the distance, calling out a new day's price of grain or wine. Her stride was calm, though each step brought her closer to the threshold of cataclysm. She glanced skyward. The sun was edging above the city's eastern rooftops, still pale but growing more resolute with every minute. By the time dusk fell again, King's Landing would stand on the cusp of annihilation. She spent the morning in quiet motion, tending to minor tasks that would help her remain inconspicuous. She visited a small stable near the mud gate, where she had arranged for a horse to be readied in case the city became impassable. She whispered a soothing word to the skittish mare, pressing her palm against its flank. The horse's eyes rolled in anxiety, sensing something uncanny about its visitor. Melisandre fed the creature a handful of oats, her expression unreadable. She would not flee if the flames demanded her presence, but the horse might serve a different end, carrying out instructions or ferrying a chosen soul if the illusions she'd planned came to fruition. From there, she made her way to a narrow alley near Rhaenys Hill, the place where she had stored certain final components of her magic. Beneath a dilapidated shed with a sagging roof, she retrieved a small clay jug hidden under loose floorboards. Inside was a thick fluid that swirled green-black in color, a local variant of wild alchemy rumored to be less stable than wildfire, but still potent enough to ignite on contact with flame. She hefted it carefully, her senses alive with caution. The slightest mishandling could spark a tragedy prematurely. She wrapped it in cloth and tucked it securely into the satchel hanging over her shoulder. Then she sat there, on the shed's floor, letting her back rest against rotted wood, and stared at a thin rectangle of sunlight shining through a crack in the wall. In that sunlight, dust motes glittered, dancing in slow patterns. She watched them, thinking how ephemeral life was. One gust of wind and they scattered, never to return to that same shape. In the quiet, she heard her own breath. She closed her eyes and drifted inward, reaching for the place where she communed with Urlor most deeply. A flicker of warmth passed through her chest. She saw again, in the private space of her mind, the vision of the Red Keep consumed by raging fire, and the silhouette of a figure in that conflagration, holding aloft a sword that burned as bright as the heart of a star. She felt sorrow at the cost, but behind that sorrow blazed a fierce exultation. This was the moment for which she had been reborn, time and again. This was the pivot on which her faith would either stand or crumble. As the day wore on, she ventured into the city to observe the movement of the watch. She noticed a new tension in the air. Guards were posted in greater numbers at key intersections. She overheard scraps of conversation about a rumored plot, whispers of the Red Woman returning with some dread design. The tales varied wildly, some claiming she meant to sacrifice newborns, others insisting she could command dragons with her voice. Melisandre paid them little heed. Fear was an ally, as it scattered men's thoughts. The real danger was if someone guessed her actual plan, but no one spoke specifically of an attempt to burn the keep. She felt a grim satisfaction in that. Most believed the days of Red Priests were long behind the city. Perhaps a few clever souls suspected more, but none had rallied the city to panic. She took care to remain hidden beneath her hood as she made her way toward the Red Keep's perimeter in the late afternoon. She stood at a vantage point near the Gate of the Gods, watching the guards' chains shift. The sun had tilted in the sky, now bright and gilded, the last flush of day descending over spires and roofs. She sensed her heartbeat accelerating. Time was drawing short. She had chosen the hour carefully. Her ritual must begin with the setting sun, continuing through the deep of night. By dawn, if the flames had their way, the Red Keep would be ash or near enough. And in that ash, if fortune and destiny favored her, Azor Ahai would step forward. the champion of the Lord of Light. That afternoon's bustle gradually shifted into evening. The city's atmosphere grew rowdy in places, subdued in others. Men returning from labor, women shutting their stalls, tavern doors swinging open to welcome weary souls. A hush of expectation tinted the air. Melisandre passed a group of street performers juggling torches. She paused to watch them toss fire back and forth, bright arcs of flame slicing the oncoming dusk. The onlookers cheered. She wondered how many of them would be running for their lives within hours. She said nothing, only gazed at the flickering torches that seemed paltry and small compared to the inferno she intended to unleash. Night fell at last. A bloated moon climbed into the sky, pale and watchful. Torchlights dotted the thoroughfares, and braziers along the city walls glowed like ember eyes. Melisandre descended into the labyrinth of alleyways around the Red Keep, moving with a quick, silent determination. This time she did not go alone. From a previous arrangement, she had compelled a handful of the city's desperate, 2 men and 1 woman who had lost homes, families, or futures in the endless wars. They had turned to her for hope, or vengeance, or both. She had promised them a part to play in a sacred event, and under the thrall of her mesmerizing words, they followed. Now she led them through the dark, their footsteps echoing behind her. They approached an old sewage conduit near the base of the keep's eastern wall, half hidden by rubble and thick clumps of ivy. The men took hold of the iron bars blocking the entrance and strained, muscles standing out in their necks, until with a screech of rusted metal, they tore the barrier loose. The woman clutched a small lantern, her fingers trembling around the handle, but Melisandre's steadying hand on her shoulder kept her calm. One by one, they slipped into the narrow passage, the stench of stagnant water and filth mingling with the musty damp of ancient stone. Inside, the conduit stretched ahead, barely wide enough for 2 people abreast. The floor was slick with algae and rotting debris. Rats scurried away from the lantern light. Drips of water plinked from above in an irregular rhythm. The group moved carefully, led by Melisandre's memory of ancient layouts and half-forgotten tunnels. She had chosen this route after verifying that it still connected, in some manner, to the vaults beneath the keep. With each step, the gloom pressed closer, the air growing thick and chill. Eventually they came upon a low archway sealed by an old wooden door, badly warped by moisture. Melisandre reached into her robes for the obsidian dagger. She drew it, and its glassy surface caught the lantern glow with an oily sheen. There was no traditional lock on the door. Time and neglect seemed to have fused it to its frame, but there was a bar across it. One of the men pried it loose, each creak deafening in the tunnel's silence. When the bar snapped off, the door nudged open a fraction, letting stale air rush past. They slipped through into a corridor of cut stone that was part of the keep's sublevels. Darkness swallowed them. The light of the small lantern seemed frail, but it exposed enough to reveal that they stood in a broad vaulted passage lined with old storerooms. Dust coated everything in a thick layer, and cobwebs hung like curtains. Melisandre recognized an intersection up ahead, one branch leading deeper below ground where she suspected some of the lost caches of wildfire might remain, and another leading upward toward the keep's undercrofts. She motioned to the woman to dim the lantern. Darkness enveloped them more fully. She took a moment, letting her eyes adjust, then guided them in the direction of the rumored vault. They found it around a bend, a heavy iron door decorated with the faded symbol of the alchemist's guild. The metal was greenish in places, corroded by time and unidentifiable substances. One of the men spat on his hands and tried the latch. It moved, but slowly. Behind it something groaned, as though from centuries of disuse. At last, the door swung inward with a reluctant cry of hinges, releasing a stale chemical odor that made the group recoil. Melisandre stepped forward, dagger raised, and peered inside. Old racks lined the walls, many empty. Broken flasks, shattered casks, and corroded metal containers lay strewn on the floor. She stepped carefully among them, wary of stepping on something that might release a deadly spark. The 2 men followed, scanning the cramped space. A large wooden barrel, half collapsed, stood near the far wall. Whatever had once been inside was long gone, leaving only black stains etched into the stone. The woman moved her lantern, revealing a smaller cask behind the larger. Its sides bore the telltale scrawl of the guild, an emblem shaped like a flame within a sunburst. Melisandre knelt beside this cask, tracing her hand over its surface. She felt the old energies lingering here, dormant yet dangerous. She could not be certain how much of the substance remained inside, or how unstable it might be after years of neglect. She signaled one of the men to pry it open, carefully. He did so, wedge by wedge, until the lid lifted with a faint hiss of escaping vapors. Inside, nestled in old sticky straw, were 2 clay jars. The men exhaled in awe, each aware that they could be holding death in their hands. "Wildfire," Melisandre murmured. She gestured for them to close it gently. "We will use only one. The other remains as a last resort." She allowed them to replace the lid, though not sealing it entirely. Her own plan relied primarily on her incantations and the specialized fluid she carried. Still, if something went wrong, if the conflagration needed a raw push, this wildfire would serve as the final impetus. She felt a tremor in her belly, a mix of dread and anticipation. They were one step closer to the cataclysm. Under her guidance, they left the vault, mindful to keep the cask door unbarred for easy return. As they retraced their steps to the corridor's junction, they heard the faintest echo of voices from somewhere above. Guards on patrol, perhaps. The group froze, hearts pounding. Melisandre led them into the deeper shadows, pressing her back against the damp wall. The woman clenched the lantern to her chest, flame muffled by her cloak. Footsteps shuffled overhead. A muffled exchange. Then silence. The tension lingered, an electric charge in the air, until the group slowly exhaled. They pressed on, moving deeper through the sublevels, ascending slowly toward the lower halls of the keep. She needed to position her loyal followers to ignite key points at her signal. While the main blaze would erupt in the Great Hall area, she wanted to ensure that the entire fortress caught fire in a near-simultaneous wave, leaving no safe quadrant for those inside. It was a brutal method. No corner of the keep would remain unscathed. But it was essential for the force and scale demanded by the prophecy. The forging of Lightbringer required a crucible of unimaginable heat. She could not afford half measures. They soon came upon a spiral stair, its steps slick with condensation. Melisandre led them upward, every sense on alert. The stone walls pressed in, the air tinged with a smell of old decay. The spiral ended in a small chamber with a rust-eaten iron gate. Through its lattice, they saw a torch-lit hallway. Melisandre placed a finger to her lips and peered out. No immediate sign of guards. She whispered an incantation under her breath, brushing her hand across the gate. A faint shimmer passed over it. An illusion spell meant to quiet the hinges and hide their presence from casual notice. One of the men gently pushed it open, and the group slid into the corridor. At this hour, the Red Keep was relatively still, though not entirely. Servants still scurried about, knights and guards patrolled. Courtiers attended late gatherings in private chambers. But the path Melisandre chose led through seldom-used hallways, the domain of dust and old tapestries. They crept along, each step a test of stealth. She guided them by memory, heading toward the region near the throne room. Beyond that, the Great Hall, with its high ceilings and massive wooden supports, would serve as the perfect focal point for the initial blaze. She pictured how the flames would climb the tall columns, devour the rafters, and race across the tapestries. Then the roof would collapse, sending embers showering into adjoining chambers. The panic would spread too swiftly for any organized response. The corridors began to widen, the walls growing more ornate. Old banners still hung, some bearing the lion of House Lannister, others displaying the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Faded and neglected, they whispered of past glories. At intervals, the group heard muffled voices or the tread of boots. Each time they ducked behind pillars or into alcoves, hearts pounding until the danger passed. The tension was a living thing, coiling in their guts. The woman clutched the lantern with sweaty palms. One of the men ground his teeth, sweat beading on his brow. Melisandre remained outwardly calm, though her pulse hammered. She was close, so close, to the destiny she had chased across continents. At length, They reached a broad archway leading to the antechamber of the great hall. Two massive wooden doors stood closed, carved with intricate motifs of dragons and battles. Likely, a guard or two would be stationed within. Melisandre nodded to the others, signaling silence, then advanced alone. She placed her ear against the door, listening. The great hall seemed quiet, but she knew it was seldom unoccupied. Perhaps only a few guards. Good. The fewer watchers she had to deal with, the simpler the ignition. She motioned the others back and gently tested the door. It gave a fraction, enough for her to peer through the crack. Torch brackets illuminated a vast empty space. Pillars rose on either side, and at the far end stood the Iron Throne itself, that twisted mass of swords hammered and melted together centuries ago. She saw no immediate sign of movement. With a soft push, she opened the door enough to slip inside. The great hall yawned before her, echoing with the hush of centuries. Long shadows sprawled across the stone floor, cast by flickering torchlight. Overhead loomed a high ceiling of heavy beams. The Iron Throne was a dark silhouette at the far end, imposing even without a king upon it. Melisandre's eyes glinted. This chamber, once filled with the roar of politics and ceremonies, would soon be a furnace. She beckoned the others inside. They moved in carefully, scanning for any presence. Two men sat dozing near the dais, presumably guards who had drawn a tiresome shift. Their helmets lay beside them on the floor, their heads lolled forward in half-sleep. Melisandre crouched behind a pillar, placing a finger to her lips. Their plan was to set multiple fires at once, but these guards might sound an alarm before the flames took hold. She motioned the woman forward. The woman nodded, swallowing hard, as she drew a slender blade from her belt. She took off her shoes to move noiselessly, stepping across the stone floor with agonizing slowness. The men behind Melisandre watched, tense. When the woman reached the dozing guards, she paused, raising the blade. Her eyes flicked back, seeking Melisandre's silent approval. Melisandre gave the barest nod. In a swift, practiced motion, the woman drew the blade across the first guard's throat. A wet gurgle, then the guard slumped forward, blood pooling around the base of the dais. The second guard stirred in shock, but only had time to open his mouth before the woman's blade pierced him under the chin. A final choking sound escaped him, and he collapsed. The group exhaled as one, tension momentarily released. Melisandre rose from her crouch, her robe sweeping across the flagstones like a crimson tide. She approached the dais, stepping around the spreading blood. The Iron Throne towered above her, metal swords forming cruel shapes in the flickering torchlight. For a moment, she paused to look upon it, reflecting on how many had killed and burned to sit upon that seat of power. Now, she would surpass them all in the scale of her deed. She turned to her companions. "Take your positions," she commanded softly. "Remember the signals." The two men nodded. One would ascend to an upper gallery above the hall, where old draperies hung. Those draperies, once lit, would create a rain of flaming fabric over the chamber. Another would move to the southwestern corridor leading to the royal apartments, ensuring that route was cut off by fire. The woman, after disposing of the guard bodies more discreetly, would remain near the main doors to set a second wave of ignitions there. Melisandre herself would stand in the center to perform the summoning incantation at the heart of the blaze. Each adherent took a small clay pot of her flammable mixture, to be ignited on her signal. They also carried flint, steel, and lengths of oil-soaked rags. Swiftly, they dispersed. The great hall felt eerily silent now, the only sound the fading drip of blood from the slain guards. Melisandre stood alone by the throne, letting her senses drink in the emptiness. She placed her hand on the seat's arm, feeling the cold metal. In the hush of the moment, she remembered distant battles, glimpses of kings and lords, the illusions of mortal power. A memory flickered through her mind. Stannis Baratheon, once believed to be the savior, so certain of his right. She shut her eyes, exhaling slowly. There had been many illusions. Now, she sought to cut through them all with the only truth that mattered, the truth of fire. When she felt the time was right, she descended the dais steps, moving to the center of the hall. The pillars rose on either side of her, like petrified giants. Torch brackets dotted the walls, feeble compared to the conflagration soon to come. She removed from her satchel the jug of alchemical fluid, carefully unwrapping the cloth. The substance inside sloshed thickly, reeking of harsh chemicals. She poured a ring of it on the floor around her, a wide circle big enough to stand in comfortably. Then she drew the obsidian dagger, slicing her palm lightly. Blood welled and dripped into the circle of fluid. She knelt, pressing her wounded hand to the stone, letting her warm blood mingle with the lethal substance. She began to chant. Her voice was a low murmur at first, weaving ancient phrases in the language of Ahai. The words vibrated with a rhythmic intensity, echoing in the hollow space of the hall. She raised her arms, blood still trickling down her wrist, and let the incantation swell in volume. The circle on the floor began to shimmer as if responding to her voice. The dagger in her hand felt hot, trembling with hidden power. Somewhere above, the man in the gallery lit the first spark. A sudden whoosh. Flames sprang to life along the draperies, casting a dancing glow across the pillars. From the southwestern corridor came a second surge of light as a rag, drenched in her mixture, ignited with a furious hiss. The woman at the main doors did the same. Fire exploded along the threshold, curling upward in hungry tongues. The smell of burning cloth, wood, and old dust filled the hall. Smoke began to gather near the ceiling. Melisandre's chanting rose in pitch, her eyes half closed as she felt Rorlor's power coursing through her. The flames responded like living creatures, flickering higher, devouring everything in their path. The temperature soared. She could taste ash on her lips. Guards outside must have seen the sudden glow. Heard the crackling roar of the flames. Alarm shouts echoed from the corridors. A trumpet call blared, muffled by the thick stone walls. Melisandre did not waver. She continued her chant, raising the obsidian dagger high, letting the circle of fluid at her feet ignite with a burst of searing light. She stood now in a ring of fire, the hem of her robes fluttering dangerously close to the flames. Her hair whipped around her face, sweat beading on her forehead. Smoke coiled overhead, forming a dark canopy that drifted upward. In every corner of the great hall, the fire spread. The old drapes shriveled, raining sparks onto the wooden beams. The pillars groaned with the heat. She heard distant crashes as parts of the structure began to weaken. Frantic voices rose, cries of terror as soldiers and servants rushed in, only to recoil from the inferno. Some tried to douse the flames with water from buckets, but it was useless. The hall was an ocean of fire. The men who had accompanied her slipped away amid the chaos, following the paths she had assigned, ensuring more corridors were lit. Each corner of the keep would soon burn. Melisandre shut out the noise. She was alone in her fervor, chanting unwaveringly, arms raised in supplication to the Red God. Her blood dripped from the palm of her raised hand, sizzling as it hit the flame. She felt a wave of euphoria, a blaze within her mind that mirrored the inferno around her. "Azor, Ahai," she cried, voice cracking with intensity. "Azor Ahai, come forth." A massive beam overhead split with a thunderous crack, sending sparks raining down. Parts of the ceiling caved in, and embers scattered around the throne. Thick smoke billowed, stinging her eyes and throat, but she did not cough or flinch. Through the tumult, she sensed a presence, something shifting at the edge of her perception, as though the veil between worlds had grown thin. She pressed her hand to her heart, feeling it hammer violently. Here, in the center of chaos, she extended every fiber of her faith outward, calling for the champion, summoning that prophesied spirit to manifest in flesh. From the dais, flames surged upward in a swirling dance, as if drawn by her voice. The iron throne glimmered dully, then began to glow faintly red from the heat. Swords twisted in the rising temperature, metal liquefying in places. She watched, entranced, as the ancient seat of power began to drip molten steel. The conflagration roared around her, drowning out all other sounds. She felt the presence more strongly now, a resonance in the air, pressing on her mind, her body, as though something long dormant was stirring to life. "All is flame," she whispered between phrases of her incantation. "All is the Lord's light." Come, champion, be born anew. A swirl of smoke parted briefly, revealing a figure stumbling into the hall from a side entrance. A guard, or perhaps a knight. Face streaked with soot, coughed violently as he tried to assess the situation. Flames licked at his boots. He spotted Melisandre, ringed in fire, and for a moment, he froze in dread. Then, with a desperate cry, he lunged toward her, sword in hand. She turned, eyes shining, and raised the obsidian dagger. Before he could close the distance, a burning timber collapsed from above, crashing between them in an explosion of sparks. He recoiled, cursing, his sword dropping from his grasp. Flames curled around the timber, forming a wall of fire. Melisandre saw the terror in his eyes, and in that moment she almost felt pity. The keep devoured men's hopes as surely as these flames devoured its foundations. She resumed her chanting, letting the guards present slip from her consciousness. If he survived, it would be Arlor's will. If not, his life would be part of the offering. She closed her eyes again, focusing on the intangible vibration in the air. The sense that something on the cusp of mortal comprehension was being drawn closer. In the corridors beyond, pandemonium raged. Bells tolled in the highest towers. Soldiers ran about shouting orders, many succumbing to panic or confusion. As the fire spread from hall to hall, entire sections of the keep succumbed to choking smoke. Walls radiated heat. Decorative tapestries and wooden doors ignited in moments, further fueling the unstoppable blaze. Through shattered windows, the flicker of orange and red glowed against the night sky. Outside, crowds gathered in horror at the sight of their fortress engulfed. Shouts echoed along the battlements as guards tried to direct water brigades. But the conflagration raged too fiercely. Melisandre stood in the heart of it, sweat streaming down her face. Her robes streaked with soot. Her voice rose and fell in a mantra that vibrated with otherworldly power. She stretched a hand toward the dais, palms searing in the heat. Azor Ahai. Azor Ahai. She repeated the name like a heartbeat, each syllable resonating with a promise. She saw the iron throne buckle, molten steel dripping from twisted blades. In the swirling chaos, shapes seemed to form in the smoke, phantoms or illusions. Her breath caught as she glimpsed what looked like a man's silhouette. It loomed for an instant near the throne, wreathed in swirling embers, then vanished behind a curtain of flame. Her heart thundered. Was that the sign? Had the champion appeared, or was it another flicker of misguided hope? She stepped out of her flaming circle, the alchemical mixture nearly exhausted, and strode toward the dais, ignoring the scorching floor that threatened to set her robes aflame. Each step was an agony of heat against her soles. The rafters overhead groaned like dying beasts. Another beam crashed to the floor in a fountain of sparks. She pressed forward, teeth clenched against the infernal temperature that singed her lungs with every breath. Reaching the dais, she saw the throne was half melted, the metal sagging, edges red hot. Smoke enveloped everything. Her eyes stung, tears streaming unbidden down her cheeks. Holding a corner of her cloak over her mouth, she peered into the swirling chaos. The silhouette appeared again, closer, more defined. A figure, tall, standing among the flames as if unaffected by the intense heat. She sensed a palpable force radiating from it, a power that curled through the air. A wave of dizzying awe passed over her. She reached out with trembling fingers. Azor Ahai? She rasped, voice raw from the smoke. For a moment, the figure seemed to regard her with burning eyes. Then the flames lashed up between them, and it vanished, leaving her standing alone by the molten throne. She teetered on her feet. Another chunk of ceiling fell, smashing into the dais, sending molten shards spattering across the floor. One stray spark caught the edge of her robe, and flames raced up the fabric. She hissed in pain and slapped at the fire, forcing it to die. Her vision swam. Everything was noise and heat and fury. The building groaning as though in death throes. Gasping, she staggered back, momentarily disoriented. She tasted blood in her mouth, coughed, and realized she had inhaled far too much smoke. Yet she would not leave, not until she was certain. If the champion was here, she had to witness his arrival. She must confirm that her sacrifice had borne the fruit of prophecy. "Show yourself," she cried, voice hoarse. "In Relor's name, let it be done." Even as she spoke, a wall of fire swept through the great hall, feeding on fresh air from a collapsed section of roof. The inferno rolled across the floor like a devouring wave. She flung an arm over her face, falling to her knees. The heat was unbearable, an assault on every sense. Dimly, she became aware that if she did not move soon, she would perish here. Perhaps that was her fate. If Azor Ahai emerged, what role had she left to play? She had served her god's purpose. But her will to see the prophecy completed urged her onward. With the last reserves of her strength, she forced herself to rise and lunge toward a side corridor. Somehow, through a haze of swirling sparks, she found the doorway. The corridor beyond was a tunnel of thick smoke and scattered flames. She stumbled through it, one hand outstretched against the wall to keep her balance. Her lungs felt seared. She coughed violently, each spasm threatening to double her over. Behind her, the great hall raged in a storm of fire, the roar of collapsing timbers chasing her down the corridor. She did not know where her faithful companions had gone, whether they lived or died in the chaos. Her entire being narrowed to one objective: to discover if Azor Ahai lived. She stumbled deeper into the keep, weaving through partially aflame hallways. Her vision blurred. Doors here and there stood ajar, revealing chaos within. She saw glimpses of soldiers struggling to rescue valuables, or searching desperately for a path out. She saw a young woman lying unmoving on the floor, smoke swirling around her. She heard groans and coughs from unseen corners. The fortress was a hellscape. Her steps faltered. She pressed a hand to the wall, leaving a bloody smear from the cut on her palm. She wanted to keep going, to keep searching, but her strength was nearly spent. As she lurched around a bend, she saw a bright glow at the corridor's end. At first, she assumed it was more flames, but something about the quality of the light was different, purer, not flickering. She squinted through the haze. The shape of a man or a spirit stood at the far end, light radiating from his form. In his hand, a sword that seemed alive with energy, though not quite flame. A glare so brilliant that it hurt her eyes to look at it. She reached out with a trembling hand, a hoarse cry in her throat. "Azor Ahai." The words tumbled from her lips, half delirious. She could not see the figure's face, only the outline, luminous and steady. The corridor wall collapsed behind her with a deafening crash, sending dust and sparks billowing. When she looked back, the figure was gone. Was it an apparition conjured by her own desperation? A swirl of illusions from the smoke in her half-suffocated brain? Or had she truly beheld the newly awakened champion? Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, coughing so violently she tasted iron. The corridor was caving in around her. She tried to rise, but her limbs shook, refusing to obey. A hush fell in her mind, each breath a ragged, scraping gasp. Perhaps this was to be the end of her long journey. She recalled the countless roads she had traveled, the sacrifices made, the illusions and failures. She recalled Stannis, the fateful battles in the north, and the unexpected survival that brought her here. And now, in the midst of smoke and ruin, she did not know if she had succeeded or if everything lay in vain. Yet even as darkness seeped into her vision, she felt a faint warmth that did not stem from the flames consuming the keep. It was softer, more intimate, as though a gentle hand touched her shoulder. The presence she had invoked for so long brushed against her consciousness. She felt it, a reassurance that, in this crucible, something had indeed been born. Azor Ahai would emerge. The shape of the future might still be hidden by swirling ash, but the seed of prophecy was planted. This knowledge gave her a shred of peace. She let her eyes slip shut, her body collapsing amid the smoke and embers. Outside, the city reeled in horror as the red keep blazed from foundation to turret. Firelight painted the night sky an ominous orange. Whole sections of the fortress crumbled under their own weight, walls and towers giving way with thunderous crashes. The roar of flames rolled out over King's Landing, accompanied by the anguished cries of those trapped or wounded. Even the stone itself seemed to weep molten tears as the once proud seat of kings succumbed to the unstoppable inferno. Citizens crowded the streets and squares, tears streaking their soot-smudged faces as they beheld the apocalypse unfolding atop Aegon's high hill. In the dawn that followed, after the flames had done their worst, only smoldering ruins remained of the Red Keep's main structures. Thick smoke clogged the air, turning sunrise into a pale, sickly glow. Soot and ash drifted across the bay, settling on ships and jetties. Survivors wandered in a daze, searching for loved ones or salvageable belongings. The city's skyline was changed forever, the symbol of its power reduced to charred rubble. And somewhere, amid the wreckage, bodies lay scattered in blackened corridors, unrecognizable. But in the hush after catastrophe, rumors began to spread. Some swore they had seen a radiant figure striding through the flames, unharmed by the searing heat, sword shining like a beacon. Others claimed a red woman had died in the inferno, or vanished with the final column of smoke. No one could say for certain. The keep's destruction overshadowed all else, and grief and rage consumed the populace. The news spread swiftly to every corner of Westeros. King's Landing's heart had burned. Beneath the rubble and embers, secrets smoldered. If some new champion truly had awakened within that crucible, the realm was in for another reckoning. And though the city could not see beyond its devastation, higher powers in distant lands might yet stir, sensing a shift in the world's balance. A single spark can ignite a blaze. A single blade of light, once forged, can decide the fate of kingdoms. When the morning sun finally broke through the haze, its rays fell upon the scorched skeleton of the Red Keep, a silent, blackened monument to ambition and prophecy. Over the heaps of stone and twisted metal, a faint trickle of smoke spiraled upward, as though the fire still hungered. No one who stood among the ruins could deny that something terrible, and perhaps something miraculous, had taken place. The Lord of Light had claimed his due. Only time would reveal whether the champion of that prophecy had indeed been reborn, or if the city's sacrifice had all been in vain. In a dim pocket of the collapsed corridors, cooled by the waning embers, a breath of movement stirred. Shattered masonry and beams had formed a ragged pocket where air could enter. There, lying prone on cracked tiles, Melisandre's eyes fluttered open, rimmed with soot. Her hair, once vibrant, clung to her blood-streaked cheeks in tangled knots. She coughed, agony tearing through her lungs. Yet, she was alive. The swirl of cinders and shadows cloaked her, and she felt an ache deeper than any physical wound. She blinked against the smoky light filtering through the debris, her heart filled with a single burning question. Was the champion truly out there, somewhere among the ashes? Or had she failed again, consumed by a prophecy that refused to grant her rest? She swallowed painfully, tasting blood and ash. Then she remembered that fleeting silhouette, the gleam that outshone even the raging fire. It had to be real. It must be. She clung to that faith as she began, inch by agonizing inch, to crawl through the ruins. Fragments of broken pillars and burnt wood shifted precariously. Every movement threatened a collapse that would crush her. Her arms trembled. Her vision wavered. But an unyielding will propelled her forward. She would see this through. If Azor Ahai existed now, somewhere in this shattered labyrinth, she would find him. Or perhaps he would find her. The only certainty was that she could not let herself die here. Not when her faith whispered that the greatest chapter was still to come. She pressed on, panting, each breath a ragged claw in her chest. She maneuvered under a leaning slab of stone, ignoring the fresh rivulets of blood that seeped from her reopened wound. The corridor beyond was partially intact, though fallen timbers barred the way forward. Smoke wreathed everything, but a faint sunlight glowed through a crack in the ceiling. She reached up, feeling a gust of fresh air brush her fingertips. With the last of her strength, she braced her legs against a broken piece of masonry, pushing upward. She felt the timbers shift, groan, but not collapse. An opening appeared. She pulled herself through, emerging onto what had once been an upper landing. The sight that greeted her took her breath away. The Red Keep was no more than a skeleton of scorched walls and rubble, open to the sky. Charred beams jutted upward like black fangs. Smoke curled from deep fissures in the wreckage. Here and there, pockets of fire still smoldered. She could see clear across what had once been the throne room. The roof was gone. The pillars collapsed. A gaping hole in the eastern wall revealed the city beyond, a city that stood in stunned silence. She slumped to her knees, eyes roving over the devastation, tears carving a path through the soot on her cheeks. She had done this. She had brought the apocalypse to King's Landing. A voice within her trembled with fear, but it was overshadowed by the conviction that whispered, "A champion is born. Pay the price. See the truth." She forced herself upright, leaning on a broken stone ledge. From this vantage, she thought she saw movement far below, shapes of men picking through debris, perhaps searching for survivors or valuables. She heard muffled shouts carried by the wind. She did not have the strength to call out or hide. She remained there, swaying, uncertain whether to attempt to reach the city or seek refuge deeper in the ruin. Then, amid the cacophony of the wind rustling through the shattered keep, she felt a faint change in the air. A presence, intangible yet potent. She turned and saw that same silhouette, wreathed in glowing light, step through a veil of rising smoke. The figure was tall, lean, wearing what seemed like blackened, soot-covered garments. In his hand, the hilt of a sword from which a faint radiance emanated. Embers danced around him, as if reluctant to relinquish their hold. Melisandre stared, heart pounding, tears brimming again. She did not speak, scarcely dared to breathe. He gazed back at her, eyes reflecting a fire that was not quite earthly. She saw neither condemnation nor pity in his face, merely a quiet, inexpressible gravity. Slowly, she tried to stand, bracing herself on the ledge. Her body quaked, threatening to collapse, but she managed to straighten enough to meet his gaze at eye level. For a moment that felt endless, they regarded one another. "I have waited," she whispered, voice raw. "I waited my entire life for you." Whether he understood her words, she could not be certain. The brilliance around him flared gently, seeming to pulse in time with her racing heart. Then he turned as though beckoned by a sound she could not hear, and stepped away, moving across a precarious span of rubble. Melisandre clutched the stone to keep feet from falling. She wanted to call out, to demand he stay, to tell her that this was all worth it. But the words choked in her throat. She watched as he vanished again into a swirl of ash. A single sob escaped her lips. Yet in that note of despair, she felt hope flicker like a candle flame. If the champion was real, then so was the salvation he promised. The terrible sacrifice might not have been in vain. She remembered the old text in the library. Lightbringer, tempered in living hearts. Indeed, thousands of hearts had been offered in this pyre. Now, somewhere amid the wreckage, a new destiny walked. Perhaps he did not yet know the fullness of his role. Perhaps the next struggle was to guide him. She closed her eyes, letting exhaustion press upon her. As her knees buckled, she sank to the floor, arms wrapped around herself. She felt the hot tears mix with soot and blood. She trembled with relief and terror all at once. The dawn was here, the Red Keep lay in ruins, and the champion had emerged from the flames. She did not know if he would claim the name Azor Ahai, or if he would curse her for the horror unleashed. She did not know if the realm would hunt him as a monster, or hail him as a savior. All she knew was that the prophecy had taken a step into reality. And so, in that shattered place, Melisandre let her consciousness drift, carried on a tide of faith and weariness, lulled by the knowledge that, whatever happened next, the Lord of Light had not abandoned this world to the dark. Below, in the ruined courtyards and broken gates, the living sorted the dead, the wounded cried for aid, and the city gaped at the spectacle of lost majesty. In days to come, bards would compose ballads of the night, the Red Keep burned, spinning tales that mingled truth and legend. Some would whisper of a fiery priestess, glimpsed in the heart of the flames, chanting a name older than Westeros itself. Others would speak of a luminous figure stepping through the inferno, unscathed by the scorching tongues that devoured stone and steel. But all would agree that nothing in the realm remained the same after that night. For good or ill, a storm of change had been unleashed. Far away, In distant corners of the land, powers ancient and new would stir at the rumors of a champion reborn. And at the center of that revelation lay the charred bones of a fortress that once crowned a kingdom, sacrificed in an altar of flame. Atop the smoldering ruins, Melisandre slept. In her dreams, she beheld two vistas. One of endless darkness, ice creeping over all things, swallowing the realm in a freezing doom, and another of blinding light, a sword raised high, 1,000 shadows burning away. Between these visions, she drifted, a silent witness to both horror and hope. Somewhere in the dreamscape, she felt a hand, warm, strong, comforting, rest on her brow. She reached for it but found only empty air. Still, the gesture filled her with a sense of calm that would sustain her through whatever trials lay ahead. When she finally opened her eyes again, hours or perhaps days later, she found herself in a simple cot, hidden within an intact corner of the keep's lower levels. The roof overhead was a slant of broken beams, half collapsed, but enough to offer shelter. A battered shutter hung precariously over a shattered window. She could see a wedge of sky through the gaps, gray and overcast. A single candle flickered near her, though she had no idea who had lit it. She felt stiff, bruised, and scalded, but alive. She tried to sit up, and a bolt of pain lanced through her ribs. She gasped, falling back onto the cot. A ragged cough clawed its way up her throat. In the gloom, she glimpsed a figure, one of the men who had aided her perhaps, or a stranger who found her after the flames died. She could not see his face clearly. He moved toward her, pressing a cup of water to her lips. She drank gratefully, wincing as the liquid met her raw throat. "You're awake," he murmured, voice low. "Don't speak too much. You need rest." She managed a nod, easing back onto the threadbare pillow. Her mind whirled with questions, but her body demanded stillness. As she lay there, listening to the remnants of the world outside, she realized that her final impetus had come to pass. The Red Keep was gone. The champion was out there. Perhaps that luminous figure was now gone from these ruins, walking a path only the gods could predict. Her lord had demanded a steep cost, and she had paid it. If fate willed, she would find the champion again. If not, her role might already be concluded. Either way, the fire was unleashed, and the realm would never be the same. She closed her eyes, letting the candle's flickering warmth lull her. She remembered the chant that had echoed from her lips, remembered how it felt to stand in a ring of fire, calling forth destiny. In a strange way, she felt lighter, freed from the burden of anticipating that terrible moment. She had faced her darkest test and survived, scarred and uncertain, but not broken. And somewhere, beyond the gray sky, she believed the Lord of Light watched still, waiting to see if the champion of flame would rise to meet the darkness that lay ahead. In the days that would follow, King's Landing would be gripped by grief and fury. Fingers would point at the Red Woman, curses spat into the air that still smelled of burnt stone and flesh. The city's survivors would reel under the magnitude of the ruin. Conspiracies would thrive in the absence of stable rule, and a swirl of rumors would shape the battered capital's future. Yet through it all, a glimmer of legend would persist, that a new dawn was coming, heralded by a figure born of the Red Keep's ashes. And in a hidden alcove, Melisandre would gather her strength, waiting for the next whisper of the flame's guidance to lead her onward. Her eyes remained closed now, battered hands folded over her chest. The candle beside her guttered, casting shadows that danced across the stones. She drifted on the edge of dreams, recalling the shape of a sword blazing in darkness, recalling a vow made long ago in the temples of Ahai. Shadows and flame, life and death, prophecy and mortal frailty. These forces had converged in King's Landing. She let out a long breath, her lips forming the words she had spoken 1,000 times. The night is dark and full of terrors, but the fire burns them all away. Beyond the broken walls, a quiet wind stirred, carrying the faint echo of weeping and whispered prayers. The Lord of Light's gaze might yet return in a blaze of revelation, or it might pass over this ruined fortress to search for other fires to kindle. But tonight, in the smoldering cradle of ashes, the destiny of the world had shifted. If Azor Ahai truly walked among the living now, the greatest battles were yet to come. and Melisandre, spent though she was, breathed a single name into the hush. Azor, Ahai.